Tuesday, April 17, 1945. Camp Ruston, Louisiana, United States. Oberhelferin Margarete Hoffman's hands trembled as she held the small white bar, its smoothness alien against her calloused palms. The scent, clean, floral, impossibly pure, made her throat constrict. Real soap. Not the gray-brown Ersatz blocks that crumbled and smelled of industrial chemicals. Not the sand and ash mixtures they'd scrubbed with for the past year. Actual soap that lathered. Steam rose from the shower stall behind her, curling through the concrete building in thick white clouds. Hot water. Running hot water, not heated in buckets over scarce coal, not rationed to 1 cupful per week. Hot water flowing endlessly from chrome fixtures that gleamed under electric lights bright enough to read by. Around her, 17 other Wehrmachthelferinnen stood frozen in various states of undress, staring at the shower heads, at the soap bars distributed by a bored American corporal, at the stacks of white towels, thick, clean, unstained towels piled on wooden benches. Several women were crying silently. "They're going to gas us," whispered Helferin Ilse-Brenner, a telephone operator from Stuttgart. "This is how it happens, the showers." But the water kept running, clear, hot, real. And somewhere in Margarete's mind, where propaganda had built walls of certainty, a crack appeared. Margarete Hoffman had served in the Wehrmacht Communications Division since 1942, when she was 20 years old. Like thousands of German women, she'd volunteered as a Wehrmachthelferin, not a soldier, but essential support staff maintaining telephone exchanges, radar stations, and administrative networks that kept the Reich's military functioning. The regime had promised women they would remain protected, serving behind the lines while men fought. By April 1945, those lines had dissolved. She'd grown up in Dortmund, where her father worked in the steel mills. She remembered the Führer's promises. Germany would never again suffer the humiliations of Versailles. The Reich would be strong, prosperous, eternal. The propaganda ministry had been clear about what capture by Americans meant. The broadcasts she'd helped transmit spoke of torture, rape, starvation. Soviet treatment of German prisoners was real and horrific. The screams broadcast from Eastern camps were no fabrication. American decadence and brutality were presented as certainties. The statistical reality she didn't know: American industrial production had surpassed German output by 1942 and never looked back. While Germany manufactured 5,500 aircraft in 1944, America produced 96,318. German steel production peaked at 28.7 million tons in 1944. America produced 81.3 million tons. German food rations by early 1945 had dropped to 1,412 calories per day for civilians. American soldiers received 4,000 calories daily and often couldn't finish their portions. The gap wasn't small, it was civilizational. Margarete's unit had surrendered 3 days earlier in Bavaria, surrounded by Patton's Third Army after their communication post was cut off. She remembered the terror as American infantry approached. She and the other women had burned papers, destroyed equipment, then stood with hands raised, expecting bullets. Instead, they'd received sea rations and been loaded onto trucks with canvas covers. fed again during transport, given water without asking. The confusion had started then, but nothing had prepared them for Louisiana. The shower stall's tile was clean, spotless. Margaret stepped under the spray, and the water hit her skin with force and heat that made her gasp. She'd expected a trickle. This was pressure, temperature, abundance. She watched water swirl down the drain, gallons of it disappearing, wasted, as if water itself was limitless. In Dortmund, her mother would catch bathwater in buckets to reuse for laundry, then give it to neighbors for their gardens. Here, it vanished into pipes without thought. The soap lathered, rich white foam covered her arms, and she stood paralyzed by the sensation. The last real soap she'd seen was Christmas 1943. For 18 months, she'd used substitutes that left skin cracked and bleeding. This bar, ivory, the label said, felt like something from another world. Mein Gott, Ilse whispered from the next stall. It's real. It's all real. Around them, the sound of crying intensified, not from pain, from something more complex. Margaret scrubbed harder, feeling 2 years of grime and exhaustion lift from her skin. The water stayed hot. 5 minutes, 10, still hot. The American corporal stood outside, smoking a cigarette, utterly unconcerned about the resources flowing through the pipes. When she finally stepped out, there were clean clothes waiting, not prison stripes, not rags, actual garments, cotton undergarments, simple dresses, socks without holes, and shoes, not wooden-soled Wehrmacht issues, but canvas sneakers with rubber soles. She dressed slowly, each item another impossibility. The towel had absorbed water instead of spreading it around. The dress fit reasonably well. The sneakers cushioned her feet. Oberhelferin Hoffman, an American lieutenant, stood in the doorway. Female, Margarete noted with surprise. The U.S. Women's Army Corps. Medical screening next, this way. They were led to an infirmary that smelled of disinfectant and fresh paint. Bright overhead lights illuminated examination rooms with gleaming equipment. A doctor, male, middle-aged, professional, examined each woman briefly, checking for typhus, tuberculosis, malnutrition. He worked with brisk efficiency, assisted by 2 nurses who spoke broken German. "You're underweight," he told Marguerite through an interpreter. 92 pounds. You should be around 115. We'll get you proper meals. Underweight. In Germany, she'd been normal. Everyone was thin. Everyone was hungry. The doctor spoke as if her condition was abnormal, fixable, temporary. Then came the X-ray. Marguerite had heard of such machines but never seen one. The apparatus was massive, modern, and the technician operated it with casual competence. Within minutes, images of her chest cavity appeared on film, checked for tuberculosis scarring. "Clear," the doctor said. Next. They processed 18 women in 40 minutes. Each received vitamins, small pills in bottles with English labels. Each was assigned a bunk number. The barracks surprised her again. Wooden buildings with actual beds, not straw pallets, mattresses, thin but present, sheets, blankets, a stove at each end, unlit because April in Louisiana was warm, windows with screens to keep out insects. Ilse sat on the bunk next to Marguerite, turning her vitamin bottle over in her hands. "Why?" she asked. "Why are they doing this?" No one answered. They didn't have answers yet. Wednesday, April 18, 1945. Camp Ruston, Louisiana. The mess hall at 0700 hours shattered what remained of Marguerite's certainty. Long tables, metal trays, American POW guards, military police, not combat infantry, serving food from behind steam tables. The smell hit first: frying bacon, fresh coffee, bread baking, real bread. Marguerite's stomach contracted violently. She hadn't smelled bacon in 3 years. The line moved forward. Each woman received a tray. Each tray was filled with portions that made no sense. 2 eggs, scrambled, yellow, still steaming. 4 strips of bacon. A slice of bread with butter, real butter, not margarine or the lard substitute spreads. A cup of coffee. A small bowl of oatmeal with milk and sugar. Marguerite stared at her tray. This was more protein than she'd eaten in a week in Germany. This was breakfast for a prisoner. She carried the tray to a table and sat, unable to begin. Around her, other women exhibited similar paralysis. Some were crying again. One, Helferin Anna Schmick from Munich, was laughing hysterically. "Eat," said the MP sergeant, not unkindly. "It's real. It's yours." Marguerite picked up the fork. The eggs were soft, seasoned with pepper. The bacon was crispy, salty, fatty in ways that made her taste buds scream. The bread was white, fine-textured, impossibly soft. She ate slowly, afraid her stomach would rebel after so long on potatoes and black bread. Across from her, Ilse ate methodically, tears streaming down her face. "My children," she whispered, "my children are starving in Stuttgart, and we're eating eggs." The guilt hit Marguerite like a physical blow. Her mother, her 2 younger sisters. In Dortmund, they had nothing. The city was rubble. Food shipments had stopped months ago. People were eating tulip bulbs and grass. And here, in an enemy prison camp, she was eating bacon. The coffee was hot, strong, sweetened with real sugar. She drank it, and the warmth spread through her chest. The Americans had coffee, mountains of it. They served it to prisoners without thought. After breakfast, they were escorted to a processing building. Each woman sat for an interview with an intelligence officer who spoke fluent German. Margarete's interviewer was a captain named Morrison, perhaps 30, with a patient demeanor. "Name, rank, unit, where stationed," he began, writing on forms with carbon copies. Margarete answered mechanically. She'd expected torture, beatings, demands for military secrets. Instead, Morrison asked routine questions, took notes, and moved to the next topic. The interview lasted 20 minutes. "You'll be here until repatriation is arranged," Morrison said. "Geneva Convention applies. You work, you get paid. Standard camp routine, roll call, meals, work assignments, free time. Medical care as needed. Questions?" Marguerite found her voice. "Why are you feeding us?" Morrison looked surprised. "Because you're prisoners of war. That's the law." "But the food?" "Standard rations," Morrison shrugged. "You're underweight. Medical says increase protein. So we will." Standard. The word echoed in her mind. This abundance was standard. Thursday, April 19, 1945. Camp Ruston, Louisiana. Work assignments began. The camp held 3,000 German POWs, mostly Wehrmacht soldiers captured in France and Italy, but a growing number of women from auxiliary services. Margarita's group was assigned to the camp laundry. The facility was industrial. Washing machines, actual electric washing machines, not hand-scrub tubs, stood in rows. Dryers, pressing equipment, soap powder in 50-pound bags, bleach, starch. The smell of detergent was overwhelming. An American corporal, bored with his assignment, demonstrated the machines. Load here, add soap, set timer, done. Next load. The machines ran on electricity, which flowed constantly. No rationing, no power cuts. The lights overhead never flickered. Margarete loaded sheets and watched the machine agitate, spinning fabric through hot water with mechanical precision. In Germany, laundry meant heating water over fires, scrubbing by hand until fingers bled, hanging everything to dry for days. Here, machines did it in 30 minutes. The corporal noticed her staring. First time seeing an electric washer? We have these in Germany, Margarete said, defensive, before the war. Sure. The corporal lit a cigarette, uninterested in arguing. He left them to work. By midday, they'd processed 600 pounds of laundry. Margarete's hands were soft, not raw. The work was monotonous, but not brutal. At lunch, they received sandwiches, white bread, ham, cheese, lettuce, and more coffee. Ilse sat beside her on a bench outside the laundry building. The machines, she said quietly, they have dozens of them, just for laundry, just in this camp. I know. How many camps do they have? Margarete didn't answer. She didn't want to calculate what the answer meant. That afternoon, a delivery truck arrived with supplies. Margarete watched from the laundry window as MPs unloaded crates. Soap powder, bleach, detergent. Case after case, stacked casually, as if these items weren't precious beyond measure. In Germany, soap required ration cards and luck. Here, it came in trucks, in quantities sufficient for thousands. The truck driver, a private, leaned against the vehicle smoking while MPs unloaded. He was young, relaxed, well-fed. His uniform was clean, properly fitted. His boots were new leather, not cardboard-soled substitutes. "Hurry up," he called to the MPs. "Got 3 more deliveries today." 3 more deliveries. Today. Margarete turned away from the window, feeling something crumble inside her chest. Saturday, April 21, 1945. Camp Ruston, Louisiana. The Red Cross packages arrived. Each woman received a parcel: chocolate bars, condensed milk, cigarettes, soap, coffee, sugar, crackers, canned meat. Items she remembered from childhood, before rationing. Items that in Germany were worth a month's wages on the black market. Margarete held the chocolate bar, Hershey's, 4 ounces, wrapped in brown paper, and couldn't open it. The weight was solid. The smell, when she finally tore the wrapper, was dark and sweet and impossible. She broke off a square, put it in her mouth, let it melt. The taste exploded across her tongue: sugar, cocoa, milk, fat, and she closed her eyes against the sensation. Rich, complex. Real chocolate, not the acorn substitute blocks that had pretended to be treats. Around her, women were weeping again, clutching parcels as if they contained pieces of their lost lives. "My daughter," Anna said, voice breaking. She's 8. She's never tasted real chocolate, not once, and I'm eating it in prison. The guilt was collective, suffocating. They were prisoners, but they lived better than their families, better than they had in the final months of the Reich, better than German soldiers on the front lines. That night, lying in her bunk, Marguerite tried to process the dissonance. The Americans were supposed to be weak, decadent, stretched thin, fighting on two fronts. The propaganda broadcasts had been clear. America was suffering, desperate, on the verge of collapse. But the evidence contradicted everything. The food, the machines, the casual waste, the chocolate given to prisoners. Ilse's voice came from the darkness. What do you think it means? I don't know. If they have this much, if they can give prisoners chocolate and soap and eggs, Ilse's voice caught. What did we believe? What was true? Margarita had no answer. The walls in her mind, built from years of propaganda, were developing fissures faster than she could repair them. Monday, April 23, 1945. Camp Ruston, Louisiana. The camp cinema showed movies twice weekly. Margarita attended out of curiosity, expecting propaganda films. Instead, they showed an American comedy, something light, trivial, incomprehensible without context. But the advertisements before the film revealed more than entertainment. American civilians appeared on screen, smiling, well-dressed, shopping in stores filled with goods. Cars, thousands of cars, driving on paved roads. Houses with lawns, 2 stories, individual families. Women in dresses that looked new, not remade from old curtains. Children playing in parks, faces round and healthy. The footage was recent, 1944, 1945. While Germany burned, Americans shopped. During a Coca-Cola advertisement, the screen showed a factory bottling line. Hundreds of bottles per minute, filled with a beverage that served no nutritional purpose, existed purely for pleasure. The machinery was automated, efficient, unstoppable. Marguerite watched, transfixed. This wasn't military production. This was civilian life. And it showed abundance beyond comprehension. After the film, walking back to barracks, Anna spoke quietly. "Did you see the houses?" "Yes. They weren't damaged. No bomb craters. No ruins." "No. The war didn't touch them," Anna continued. "They sent armies across the ocean, supplied them with everything, fought on 2 fronts, and their cities are intact. Their people are fat. Their children have chocolate." The implication hung in the air. If America could do all that while fighting a global war, while feeding prisoners chocolate, while making movies and bottling soft drinks, what did that say about German strength? What did it say about the propaganda that promised victory? Wednesday, April 25, 1945. Camp Ruston, Louisiana. News filtered through the camp. Hitler was reportedly in Berlin, surrounded. Germany was collapsing. The Reich had weeks, perhaps days. The American guards didn't celebrate. They went about their duties with professional detachment. Work assignments continued. Meals arrived on schedule. The routine was unbroken. That evening, Margarete was called to the camp headquarters. Captain Morrison sat behind a desk covered with papers and a telephone, a working telephone with long-distance access to anywhere in America. "News from home," Morrison said, not unkindly. He slid a Red Cross telegram across the desk. "Your family is alive. British occupation zone. They're in a displaced persons camp near Essen." Marguerite read the telegram 3 times. Her mother, her sisters, alive. In British custody, which meant food, shelter, survival. "You can write to them," Morrison added. "Letters go through Red Cross. Takes time, but they get through." He provided paper, an envelope, a pen. Real ink, not the watered-down substitutes they'd used in Germany. Margaret sat in the headquarters building, staring at the blank page. What could she write? That she was a prisoner eating eggs and bacon? That she showered in hot water while they lived in ruins? That the enemy had treated her better than her own government had in the final year of the Reich? She wrote carefully. "Mother, I am alive. I am unharmed. The Americans are feeding us. I will come home when they allow. Stay strong. I love you." She didn't mention the chocolate. She didn't describe the abundance. How could she? How could words convey the cognitive earthquake she was experiencing? Morrison sealed the letter himself, adding it to an outgoing mail pile. "Should reach them in 2 weeks, maybe 3. "Thank you," Marguerite said. Standard procedure. That word again. Standard. Friday, April 27th, 1945. Camp Ruston, Louisiana. The work assignment changed. Marguerite's group was transferred to the camp kitchen, not as cooks, but as food preparation assistants. Here, the reality of American logistics became unavoidable. The kitchen served 3,000 men and 200 women, 3 meals daily. The food arrived in trucks, sacks of potatoes, crates of eggs, boxes of bacon, fresh vegetables, milk in glass bottles, meat in refrigerated containers. The quantities defied comprehension. The head cook, a sergeant from Georgia, ran the operation with casual efficiency. Breakfast for 3,000, 1,200 eggs, 400 pounds of bacon, 600 loaves of bread, 80 pounds of coffee. Simple math. Simple math. Simple. Marguerite watched as cooks cracked eggs by the dozen, tossed spoiled ones without thought, poured coffee grounds into filters with generous hands. There was no rationing, no desperate conservation, no measuring of portions to avoid waste. At one point, a crate of oranges arrived, fresh citrus, bright and fragrant. The sergeant inspected them, found a few with soft spots, and dumped half the crate into the waste bin. "Bad batch," he said, shrugging. "Get better ones tomorrow." Marguerite stared at the discarded oranges. In Germany, an orange was a Christmas miracle, fought over in black markets, traded for wedding rings. Here, dozens were thrown away because they weren't perfect. Ilse stood beside her, watching the same scene. "Do you remember oranges?" she asked. "My father brought one home in 1938, Margarete said, before the war. We divided it into 8 pieces, 1 for each person. I remember the taste. I haven't seen one in 7 years. The waste bin filled with oranges that weren't quite right. Probably 30 pounds, enough to feed a German family for a month." That night, lying in her bunk, Marguerite calculated. If this camp, one camp, received this much food daily, and there were hundreds of camps across America, and millions of civilians ate even better than prisoners, the numbers became astronomical, incomprehensible. The scale of American production dwarfed anything Germany had achieved, even at the height of the Reich's power. The propaganda had said America was weak, decadent, soft. But weakness didn't feed prisoners bacon. Decadence didn't run industrial laundries. Softness didn't build machines that made chocolate for soldiers while fighting on 3 continents. The wall in her mind, the structure built from trust in the Führer and belief in German superiority, wasn't just cracking anymore. It was collapsing entirely. Tuesday, May 1, 1945. Camp Ruston, Louisiana. News arrived. Hitler was dead. Berlin had fallen. Germany was surrendering piecemeal. The American guards remained professional. No celebrations, no gloating. They simply continued their work, processing reports, maintaining order, serving meals. In the barracks that night, the German women gathered in clusters, speaking quietly. Some wept, some sat in stunned silence. A few, like Anna, laughed bitterly. "It's over," Anna said. "Everything we fought for, everything we believed, all lies." "Not all lies," Ilse protested weakly. "We loved Germany, that was real." "We loved a Germany that never existed," Anna replied. "Look at us, prisoners in Louisiana, eating eggs, using soap, sleeping in beds. Our families are starving in ruins. The Führer killed himself. The Reich is ash, and we are alive because the Americans chose to keep us alive, chose to feed us, chose to treat us like humans. What does that say about everything we were taught?" No one answered. The truth was too large, too devastating. Marguerite lay awake, processing. She thought about the soap, the hot water, the chocolate, the oranges in the waste bin, the washing machines, the trucks delivering supplies. The casual abundance that flowed through this camp, one camp among hundreds, without strain or limit. She thought about the propaganda broadcasts she'd helped transmit, about the promises of victory, about the assurances that Germany was strong and America was weak. She thought about the contrast, the physical, undeniable, overwhelming contrast between what she'd been told and what she'd witnessed. In that darkness, in a barracks in Louisiana, Margarete Hoffman understood. Everything had been inverted. The strong were weak, the weak were strong. The superior were inferior. The inferior were superior. The Reich's entire worldview had been a mirror reflecting lies. The soap wasn't just soap, it was evidence. The hot water wasn't just comfort, it was proof. The chocolate wasn't just food, it was a weapon more devastating than any bomb, because it revealed the truth propaganda had worked so hard to conceal. America hadn't defeated Germany primarily through military might, though they possessed that in overwhelming measure. They defeated Germany by existing, by demonstrating through their casual abundance that the 1,000-year Reich had been built on foundations of delusion. And perhaps most crushing, the Americans had no idea. They weren't trying to make a point. The sergeant throwing away oranges wasn't demonstrating anything. The corporal running the washing machines wasn't proving American superiority. The MP serving eggs wasn't making a statement about German weakness. They were just doing their jobs. This was normal for them. That realization, that American abundance and efficiency and casual competence were baseline, standard, unremarkable, was more shattering than any deliberate cruelty could have been. Monday, May 7th, 1945, Camp Ruston, Louisiana. Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. The camp held a formation. American officers read the surrender announcement in German and English. The German POWs stood at attention, hearing the words that marked the end of everything. Marguerite felt nothing. Numbness, exhaustion. The collapse had been visible for months. This was merely the official acknowledgement. After the formation, the camp's routine continued unchanged. Breakfast, work assignments, lunch, free time, dinner. The Americans had planned for this outcome and implemented procedures smoothly. Over the following weeks, preparations began for repatriation. The process would take months. Shipping space was limited. Priority went to Allied personnel returning home. German POWs would be processed through European camps before eventual release. Margarete spent those weeks working in the kitchen, watching food arrive in quantities that still shocked her, listening to American soldiers discuss their plans for going home, plans that included buying cars, starting businesses, attending universities on government benefits. She received another letter from her mother via Red Cross. The displaced persons camp in the British zone had adequate food. Rations were small but sufficient. Her youngest sister was ill but recovering. Dortmund was ruins. There was no work, no housing. They were surviving on Allied aid. Allied aid. The phrase stung. Her family survived because the victors chose to feed them, just as she survived in Louisiana because captors chose to treat prisoners humanely. In June, American newspapers began arriving in the camp, passed around among POWs learning English. Margarete read accounts of concentration camps liberated by Allied forces. Photographs, testimonies, evidence of atrocities she'd heard whispered about but never fully believed. The cognitive dissonance shattered completely. The regime she'd served had committed horrors while telling citizens they were defending civilization. The enemy she'd feared had liberated death camps and fed starving prisoners. Everything was inverted. Everything. September 1945, Camp Ruston, Louisiana. Repatriation orders finally came. Marguerite's group would ship to England, then transfer to processing camps in Germany's British zone. From there, dispersal to whatever homes remained. The night before departure, the American camp commander hosted a farewell meal. Not required, not expected, just provided. The mess hall served steak, potatoes, vegetables, pie for dessert. The commander, a colonel who'd never spoken to the German prisoners directly, made brief remarks through an interpreter. "You're going home to difficult circumstances. I won't pretend otherwise. Rebuilding will take years. You're young. You can help rebuild better than before. Good luck." That was it. No speeches about democracy, no lectures about German crimes, no gloating about victory. Just an acknowledgement of reality and a practical wish for the future. Margarita ate the steak slowly, knowing it would be her last American meal. The meat was tender, seasoned perfectly, cooked by professionals who served food to prisoners as if it mattered. After dinner, she walked through the camp one final time. The barracks, the laundry with its electric machines, the kitchen with its industrial refrigerators, the shower building with its endless hot water. She'd arrived expecting torture and received soap, expected starvation and received bacon, expected brutality and received bureaucratic efficiency touched with occasional kindness. The transformation was complete. Margarete Hoffman, who'd volunteered for the Wehrmacht believing in German superiority and Allied barbarism, was returning home as someone entirely different. The soap had done what propaganda couldn't. It had told the truth. March 1946. Dortmund, British occupation zone, Germany. Margarete stood in line for rations with her mother and sisters. The British military government distributed food weekly: canned goods, flour, powdered milk, occasional fresh vegetables. Not abundant, but sufficient. Around her, Dortmund remained largely rubble. Cleanup efforts continued slowly. Families lived in basement apartments and reconstructed ground floors. The steel mills sat silent, awaiting reconstruction. Her mother noticed her weight. "You look healthy," she said, surprised. "The Americans fed you well." "Yes." "Better than here?" Margaret hesitated, then nodded. "Much better." Her mother processed that information in silence. What could she say? Her daughter had been a prisoner and lived better than free Germans. Margaret found work with the British administration, translating documents. The occupiers needed Germans who spoke English and understood bureaucratic procedures. Her Wehrmacht service, ironically, made her qualified. She worked in offices that reminded her of Camp Ruston, organized, efficient, supplied with necessities. The British were less abundant than Americans, but still possessed resources Germany lacked. At night, she wrote in a journal she'd started in Louisiana, recording memories before they faded. The soap, the showers, the chocolate, the washing machines, the oranges in the waste bin, the casual, devastating abundance. She wrote about the transformation, the psychological collapse, the rebuilding of her worldview from fragments. One entry, dated April 1946, read, "I expected torture and received kindness. I expected starvation and received chocolate. I expected to die hating the enemy and instead learned to question everything I'd been taught. The soap wasn't just soap. It was the truth the Reich had tried to hide, that we were never superior, never destined for greatness, never chosen. We were ordinary people led by madmen into a war we could never win against enemies we never understood." The hot water washed away more than dirt. It washed away delusions. August 1952, Dortmund, West Germany. Reconstruction had transformed the city. New buildings rose beside carefully restored old structures. The steel mills operated again, producing for the Marshall Plan recovery. People worked. Children attended school. Stores sold consumer goods, modest selections, but present. Marguerite, now 30 years old, worked as an administrator for a trade organization, coordinating with American companies. The occupiers had become partners. Former enemies were now essential allies against the Soviet threat. She'd married, had a daughter, lived in a small apartment with running water and electricity. Life was stable, if not prosperous. One afternoon, organizing shipping documents, she encountered a familiar name. Ivory soap. American imports for German retailers. She held the invoice, remembering the white bar in a Louisiana shower building 7 years earlier. The soap still existed, still produced, still shipped around the world in quantities sufficient to supply millions. That evening, she visited a department store carrying American goods. There, on a shelf, boxes of ivory soap. She bought one, expensive but affordable now, and brought it home. Her daughter, watching her unwrap it, asked, "What's special about soap?" Marguerite ran her fingers over the smooth surface, inhaling the familiar scent. "This," she said quietly, "taught me the truth." What truth? How to explain? How to convey the psychological earthquake of 1945, the shattering of certainty, the reconstruction of understanding? That the world isn't what we're told it is, Marguerite said finally. That reality matters more than propaganda, that abundance is stronger than slogans, that the people who defeated us weren't monsters, they were ordinary people with better systems, more resources, and the good fortune to avoid madmen. Her daughter looked confused, too young to understand. Someday, Margaret thought, she would explain properly. She would pass on the lesson learned in a Louisiana prison camp. She placed the soap in the bathroom, beside the German-made varieties available now. A reminder. A memorial to the person she'd been, and the transformation forced upon her by the unbearable kindness of enemies who'd won the war not only with bombs and bullets, but with hot water and chocolate. June 1978, Dortmund, West Germany. Margarete Hoffman sat in her living room, a tape recorder on the coffee table, speaking to a history graduate student researching German POW experiences. She was 56, retired, a grandmother. The war was 33 years past. "People ask if we were tortured," she said, her voice steady. "We were, in a way, but not how we expected. The torture was kindness, abundance, evidence that everything we'd believed was false." The student listened, taking notes. "The moment I understood, truly understood, was in the camp kitchen," Marguerite continued. "Watching a sergeant throw away oranges because they had soft spots. In Germany, we'd traded jewelry for single oranges. In Louisiana, they went into garbage bins by the pound." That image stayed with me more than any battle scene, any propaganda film, any Hitler speech, because it was undeniable, physical, real. Did other women experience the same transformation? Most of us, some faster, some slower. We'd talk at night, trying to process what we were seeing. The cognitive dissonance was painful. Loyalty to Germany conflicting with evidence that Germany had been built on lies. Eventually, evidence won. It had to. You can't argue with Bacon. She laughed at that, a dry sound. "The Americans never tried to convert us," she added. "They didn't lecture about democracy or capitalism. They just existed, fed us, clothed us, processed paperwork. The system worked without cruelty, without drama, without propaganda. That efficiency, that competence, that casual abundance, that was the weapon, not the bombs, the soap." The interview continued for 2 hours. Marguerite recounted details: the shower scene, the chocolate, the washing machines, the waste, the movies, the final meal. She described the psychological journey from certainty to doubt to collapse to reconstruction. "Do you think Germany has learned?" the student asked finally. Margarete considered. "West Germany has learned. We learned because we had no choice. The evidence was overwhelming. We couldn't maintain delusions when reality contradicted them so absolutely. The question is whether future generations who didn't experience the transformation will remember. Whether the lessons written in soap and hot water will survive when the people who learned them are gone." She paused, looking at the tape recorder. "That's why I'm telling you this," she said. "So it's recorded. So someone in the future will know that psychological change is possible, but it requires confronting reality without the comfort of propaganda. It requires being willing to admit you were wrong, completely, devastatingly wrong. That's painful. Most people avoid pain. But if we don't remember, if we forget how thoroughly we were deceived, we become vulnerable to deception again." The student nodded, still writing. "I kept the soap wrapper," Margarete added quietly, "from that first shower in Louisiana. For years I carried it in my wallet, a reminder. My daughter found it once and asked why I kept trash. I told her it wasn't trash. It was evidence that reality is stronger than lies, that truth has weight, that propaganda collapses when confronted with the physical world." She stood, walking to a bookshelf, retrieving a small frame. Inside, yellowed and fragile, was the ivory soap lapper from April 1945. "This piece of paper defeated the Third Reich more surely than any army," she said, "because it represented something the Reich couldn't provide. Actual abundance, actual competence, actual humanity. The Nazis could make grand promises, build impressive monuments, stage spectacular rallies. But they couldn't make soap appear in Louisiana prison camps for captured enemies. They couldn't keep the lights on. They couldn't feed their people. They couldn't match the productive capacity of a nation they called weak." She handed the frame to the student, who photographed it carefully. "Historians will write about generals and battles," Margarete said. "They'll analyze strategy, technology, leadership. All important. But they'll miss what we felt, those of us who lived through the transformation. They'll miss the psychological shock of abundance, the cognitive earthquake of kindness from enemies, the devastating realization that everything we'd served was a lie, built on lies, built on emptiness." Historical assessment. Post-war studies confirmed what Margarete Hoffman experienced. According to U.S. Army records, German POWs held in American camps gained an average of 23 pounds during their imprisonment. Mortality rates among German POWs in American custody were 0.15% compared to 3.5% in German custody of Allied prisoners. Medical care, nutrition, and living conditions in American POW camps exceeded standards required by the Geneva Convention. Professor Frank Biss, in his 2006 study Homecomings, Returning POWs and the Legacies of Defeat in Post-War Germany, documented the profound psychological impact of American captivity. Surveys conducted in the 1950s showed that 74% of German POWs who'd been held in the United States expressed positive views of American society, compared to 23% who'd never been to America. Many former POWs became advocates for democracy, capitalist economics, and Atlantic cooperation during West Germany's Reconstruction. The contrast extended beyond PO camps. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted in 1945, documented the industrial disparity. American factories produced 2.4 million trucks during the war. Germany manufactured 346,000. American oil production reached 4.7 million barrels daily. Germany synthesized 124,000 barrels daily from coal. American food production fed not only its military and civilians, but provided substantial aid to allied nations and eventually to defeated enemies. Dr. Richard Overy, in Why the Allies Won, 1995, argued that material superiority alone doesn't explain Allied victory. Morale, strategy, and leadership mattered. But material superiority created the foundation for everything else. Soldiers fight better when fed. Civilians support wars when not starving. Propaganda works until confronted with overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The soap, the hot water, the chocolate, these weren't peripheral details. They were the physical manifestation of systemic advantages the Axis never understood. Germany mobilized its economy for total war, but couldn't match American production operating at partial capacity. Japan conquered resource-rich territories, but couldn't process them as efficiently as American industry. The Axis propaganda machines promised victory, while their people ate Ersatz bread and scrubbed with sand. By 1950, approximately 372,000 German POWs had returned from American custody. Follow-up studies showed significantly lower rates of PTSD, political radicalization, and revanchism compared to POWs who'd been held by the Soviet Union. The difference in treatment created different political outcomes. West German democracy was built partly by men and women who'd experienced American systems firsthand and found them superior to Nazi promises. November 1989, Dortmund, West Germany. Margarete Hoffman, now 67, watched television coverage of the Berlin Wall falling. Young people danced on the concrete barrier, hammering it apart with whatever tools they could find. East Germans poured through checkpoints, weeping with joy. Her daughter sat beside her, now 43, with her own children. 3 generations watching history. "They're learning what you learned," her daughter said quietly. "That the system they lived under was built on lies. That the enemy they feared actually had the better system." Margarete nodded, unable to speak. The transformation she'd experienced in Louisiana was now being experienced by 17 million East Germans confronting West German prosperity. The same shock, the same cognitive dissonance, the same collapse of propaganda when faced with undeniable reality. The television showed East Germans in West Berlin supermarkets, standing paralyzed before shelves stocked with products. The same expression Margarete had worn in the Camp Ruston mess hall in 1945. Disbelief, wonder, shame, confusion, transformation. "Did you ever doubt?" her granddaughter asked. "Later, when you came home, did you ever think maybe the Americans had just tricked you?" "No," Margarete said, "because the evidence kept accumulating. The Marshall Plan, the airlift to Berlin, Reconstruction aid, the Federal Republic's success. The Americans didn't just win the war. They helped rebuild the losers, made us partners, created systems that worked. The Soviet Union, by contrast, took everything from East Germany and left ruins. The evidence was always there, everywhere, undeniable. She thought about the soap wrapper, still in its frame in her study. 44 years old, yellowed, fragile, but preserved. Your generation didn't experience what I did, she continued, addressing her granddaughter. You grew up in prosperity, democracy, peace. You don't remember hunger, propaganda, the shock of abundance after deprivation. That's good. That means we succeeded in rebuilding. But it also means you don't understand viscerally how fragile civilization is, how easily people can be deceived, how important evidence is when confronting lies. On television, East Germans clutched bananas, chocolate, oranges, items rationed or unavailable in their communist paradise. The same items that had shattered Marguerite's worldview in 1945. The soap and hot water weren't just comfort, she said, trying to explain to this generation who'd never known scarcity. They were proof, physical, undeniable proof that the system we'd served was inferior, not in theory, not in debate, in measurable, touchable, real terms. The Americans could provide for prisoners what the Reich couldn't provide for loyal citizens. That truth was more devastating than any military defeat. Her daughter squeezed her hand. She understood. She'd heard the stories, seen the soap wrapper, absorbed the lessons. The grandchildren, watching strangers celebrate on television, were learning their own version. Perhaps that was enough. April 2000, Dortmund, Germany. Margarete Hoffman celebrated her 78th birthday surrounded by family in the reunified Germany. Her health was failing, decades of work, age, the residue of wartime malnutrition, but her mind remained sharp. A historian from the University of Munich visited, working on a comprehensive oral history project about German women in World War II. Margarete agreed to a final, detailed interview. The question historians ask, the professor said, is whether the psychological transformation you describe was genuine or simply pragmatic adaptation. Did you truly change your worldview, or did you just learn to say what the victors wanted to hear? Margarete smiled, having anticipated this skepticism. I'll tell you how you know it was genuine, she said. I raised my daughter to question authority, to demand evidence, to never accept propaganda without verification. I taught her that systems should be judged by results, not promises. I became active in democracy advocacy, worked with reconciliation programs, supported European integration. Not because occupiers forced me, not because it was advantageous, but because the evidence convinced me that democracy, capitalism, and international cooperation produced better outcomes than fascism, autarky, and militarism. Paused, gathering strength. Pragmatic adaptation would have meant hiding beliefs until politically convenient. Real transformation meant rebuilding myself from nothing, accepting that I'd been wrong about everything fundamental, and constructing a new worldview based on evidence rather than ideology. That's painful. People don't do that unless forced by overwhelming proof. The professor nodded, recording.
The soap was overwhelming proof, Margarete continued. So was the chocolate, the hot water, the washing machines, the casual waste, the kindness to enemies, the movies showing American prosperity, the food in quantities we couldn't imagine, the medical care, the efficiency, the competence.
Every single day provided new evidence that contradicted everything the Reich had taught. Eventually, you can't maintain cognitive dissonance. The wall breaks. You accept reality. And what was that reality? That Germany wasn't a master race destined for greatness. We were an ordinary nation led by criminals into a war against enemies vastly more powerful than our propaganda admitted. That American decadence was actually prosperity based on productive efficiency. That Allied weakness was actually strength based on functional systems. That everything we'd believed was inverted.
The truth was the opposite of what we'd been told. She leaned back, tired. The soap wasn't just soap, she repeated, echoing her statement from decades earlier. It was a weapon more powerful than bombs, because it revealed truth. And truth, when you've lived under lies, is devastating. But also liberating, because once you know you've been deceived, you can start building something real. Epilogue. April 2003, Dortmund, Germany. Margarete Hoffman died peacefully at age 81, surrounded by 3 generations of family. Her obituary in the local newspaper mentioned her wartime service, her post-war work in reconstruction, her advocacy for democracy and European integration. At her request, she was cremated. Her ashes were scattered in a garden she'd tended for decades, a small plot where she grew vegetables, flowers, and maintained a sense of connection to the earth that had outlasted regimes and ideologies. Among her personal effects, her family found the framed soap wrapper from Camp Ruston, Louisiana, April 1945. Also a diary spanning from 1945 to 2003, documenting her psychological journey from Wehrmacht auxiliary to democratic citizen. Letters exchanged with former prisoners, tracking their various paths through post-war Germany. Newspaper clippings about American aid programs, Marshall Plan successes, German recovery statistics. Her daughter donated the collection to the German Historical Museum in Berlin, where they joined thousands of similar artifacts documenting the transformation of German society from fascism to democracy. The soap wrapper was placed in an exhibit titled Everyday Objects, Extraordinary Change. The placard read, "Ivory soap wrapper, United States, 1945. Kept by Oberhelferin Margarete Hoffman after her capture and imprisonment at Camp Ruston, Louisiana." Hoffman later wrote, "This soap represented the truth that shattered propaganda, that our enemies possessed abundance, competence, and humanity that the Reich could never provide. In that moment of collision between expectation and reality, transformation became inevitable." Visitors often paused at this exhibit, puzzled. A soap wrapper? How could such a mundane object carry historical significance? But those who read the accompanying text, who absorbed Hoffman's testimony, who understood the psychological journey from indoctrination to evidence-based reality, recognized the deeper truth. Wars are won by bullets and bombs, but lasting victories require transforming enemies into partners.
That transformation happens not through force, but through demonstrating superior systems, through providing abundance where propaganda promised scarcity, through showing humanity where ideology predicted cruelty. The soap didn't just clean Margarete Hoffman's skin. It washed away the lies she'd believed, the propaganda she'd internalized, the worldview she'd trusted. In its place, reality flowed like hot water, uncomfortable at first, shocking in its abundance, but ultimately undeniable and transformative. 78 years after April 1945, the lessons remained relevant. Propaganda still flourished. Authoritarian regimes still deceived populations. Wars still erupted from ideological delusions. But evidence still mattered. Truth still had weight. Physical reality still contradicted lies. Somewhere, in archives and museums and personal collections, artifacts remain from those moments when propaganda collided with reality. Soap wrappers, chocolate bar packages, photographs of abundance, testimonies of transformation. They tell the same story Margarete Hoffman lived. That human beings can change when confronted with overwhelming evidence. That systems should be judged by results, not promises. That the most powerful weapon against deception is demonstrable truth. A bar of soap, hot water from endless supplies, chocolate given to prisoners. These small things accomplished what armies alone could not. They revealed that one side fought for lies, the other for a reality that, while imperfect, was measurably, demonstrably, undeniably better. Margarete Hoffman never forgot that first shower in Louisiana, never forgot the weight of soap in her hand, the smell of cleanliness, the heat of water that flowed without limit. Never forgot the moment her certainty shattered and reconstruction began. The soap taught me truth, she told her granddaughter days before her death. Remember that. When someone offers you ideology, demand evidence. When propaganda promises greatness, look at the soap. Can the system provide basic dignity and abundance? Not for elites, for everyone, even enemies, even prisoners. That's the test. Everything else is words. The granddaughter remembered, the lesson passed to another generation, carried forward by those who understood that transformation begins with small things. Soap, water, chocolate, kindness that reveal large truths about systems, ideologies, and the eternal struggle between propaganda and reality. In a museum in Berlin, a soap wrapper rests under glass, testament to the power of evidence over ideology, of abundance over propaganda, of the unbearable kindness that shattered certainty and rebuilt understanding. The truth, like hot water, flows endlessly for those willing to stand beneath